The Galactic Council's decision to ban firearms echoed through every known system. Over 600 species had ratified the Firearm Disarmament Accords, a treaty hailed as a step toward lasting interstellar peace. Yet, beneath the diplomatic language, everyone understood who the real target was: humanity. Among species who prized energy weapons, biotech, and psychic warfare, humans had always clung to kinetic force, gunpowder, mass, and velocity. The ban wasn't about peace. It was about control. To the Council, it made sense. Humans were new to the galactic stage, unpredictable and aggressive by reputation. Their ships carried railguns and magnetic accelerators. Their soldiers preferred projectiles over plasma. In the Council's eyes, they were brutes pretending to be diplomats. So they took away the one thing humans had mastered, their guns, and expected silence to follow. Earth signed the treaty without protest. The Terran Defense Coalition withdrew from contested systems, scaled down visible operations, and restructured fleets. Outposts went dark. Colonies appeared defenseless. And across the galaxy, species laughed. Let the humans try diplomacy now. Without their guns, they were harmless. The Zentari ambassador called them declawed predators. The Shulvok Prime described them as tamed apes still clinging to myths of strength. Still, the humans said nothing. Their ambassadors smiled. Their fleets stayed docked. No retaliatory moves. No outrage. Only silence. But something didn't add up. Weeks after the ban, a Zentari strike cruiser intercepted a pirate transmission near the Vel Station trade corridor. A human colony ship had been attacked, and the pirates were boasting until the signal cut out mid-sentence. The cruiser was dispatched to investigate. What it found was a ghost ship. The pirate vessel drifted, systems cold. No visible damage to the hull. The crew floated inside, eyes wide, expressions frozen in mid-scream. No burn marks, no bullet wounds, no signs of violence at all. The Zentari report noted internal bleeding, neurological disruption, and fractured bones without trauma. Then came the second incident. This time it was a Shulvok raiding vessel, burned from the inside without a single scorch on the hull. The crew's implants had shorted, cooking their nervous systems. The ship's black box recorded only a high-pitched hum seconds before silence. The Council began to worry. Officially, humans had complied with the ban. No firearms were present. Their ships passed every inspection. And yet, something had clearly changed. Human convoys no longer requested escort. Colonies in unstable sectors stopped reporting attacks, not because pirates had been arrested, but because they vanished. Whispers spread across military channels. Terrans are using something else. They're hiding a weapon. Whatever they've built, it doesn't leave a trace. Speculation spiraled, but no one could prove anything. Aliens believed humans were creatures of brute force. What they failed to understand was that humanity's greatest strength was never in its weapons, but in its adaptability. Firearms were a solution, not a necessity. Humans had fought with sticks, with fire, with fists, with strategy. When denied their tools, they invented new ones. By the third month, the TDC had deployed dozens of new defense systems, all technically legal, none classified as firearms. A Zentari scout drone caught a glimpse of one, a floating orb launched from a Terran corvette. No energy signature, no discharge, just an instant gravitational shift that crushed the drone in place. Even then, the Council hesitated. Admitting the mistake would undermine the Accords. Besides, if humans weren't firing guns, technically they were still compliant. So the Council remained quiet, hoping it would all fade. But it didn't. A massive pirate fleet targeted a remote human mining colony on the edge of the Exxon Rift. Dozens of ships, veterans of hundreds of raids. They approached under stealth, expecting a slaughter. No defense systems detected. No planetary shields. Just a few habitat domes and automated drills. They landed without resistance. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. The first wave of pirates entered the mining facility and collapsed without warning. Internal organs liquefied, their weapons untouched. The second wave tried to retreat, but their ships failed to respond. Hulls buckled from the inside as though crushed by invisible hands. Communications cut out. The only broadcast from the colony was a simple message sent in every galactic language. Compliance achieved. Threat neutralized. No firearms used. The message sparked outrage. Centauri War leaders demanded answers. Shilvok scientists reviewed the data and could find no violation. Every weapon used was categorized as a tool, technically non-lethal in design, repurposed for defense. Behind closed doors, fear began to bloom. The Council had attempted to disarm humanity. Instead, it had pushed them into innovation. And unlike kinetic rounds, what humans now used couldn't be blocked with shields or disabled with EMPs. These weren't weapons. They were concepts given form. Gravity manipulated like clay, sound turned into a scalpel, matter transmuted on contact. Alien military doctrines hadn't changed in centuries. Strategy was predictable. Shields and energy levels, armor and mass. But humans? They changed the rules entirely. Not because they wanted war, but because the galaxy had forced them to survive without their crutches. The Council convened again. Closed chambers, heated voices. Some demanded sanctions. Others advised caution. But none of them noticed what mattered most. Humanity had stopped asking permission. They weren't rebelling. They weren't retaliating. They were simply adapting, as they always had. In the core systems of the TDC, production of traditional weapons had ceased. Entire sectors had been retooled for conceptual warfare development. AI labs worked alongside neuroscientists. Quantum engineers teamed with exosociologists. New weapons weren't being forged, they were being imagined. When an alien envoy finally asked a Terran scientist what they were building now, the reply was chilling in its simplicity. We're not building weapons anymore. We're removing obstacles. The ban on firearms hadn't disarmed humanity. It had unshackled them. Before the ban, humanity had poured centuries of innovation into refining the power of kinetic warfare. But when that path was stripped away, the question wasn't whether humanity would adapt. It was how far they'd go. Inside classified research facilities buried beneath the Martian crust and orbiting the icy rings of Neptune, Earth's brightest minds got to work. The directive was clear: create solutions that couldn't be classified as firearms, yet rendered traditional warfare obsolete. The result wasn't a single breakthrough, but dozens. Some were terrifyingly elegant. Others were so simple that their effectiveness felt insulting. And every one of them had a common trait. They followed the letter of the law, while bending its spirit until it screamed. The first was the resonance pulse array, a handheld device designed originally for mining vibrations on asteroid surfaces. In military use, it sent ultra-low frequency waves that resonated with the fluids in a living body. Victims collapsed in seizures or fell unconscious, their nervous systems overwhelmed. The device had no trigger, no projectile, and no visible discharge. It was officially registered as a geological analyzer. Then came Zero-K foam, developed by Terran space engineers to seal hull breaches instantly. When repurposed, the foam could be deployed as a dense burst of molecularly unstable matter that expanded rapidly, absorbing kinetic energy and locking limbs in place before vanishing in seconds. Pirate crews found themselves frozen mid-attack, suffocating inside their own ships, sealed in by the very air they breathed. Worse still was the folded gravity mine. This wasn't a weapon by design. It was a tool for high-orbit construction, used to gently manipulate gravitational fields around satellites. Engineers discovered that when amplified beyond standard parameters, the field could be narrowed into a spatial anomaly, a silent crush zone with no light, no heat, and no warning. Anything inside was flattened in milliseconds. Ships, armor, bone, all compacted into dense, lifeless debris. None of these were firearms. They fired no projectiles, ignited no powder, and discharged no energy beams. They were, in every legal sense, tools. Reports started to trickle in. A Centauri battleship disintegrated without firing a shot while patrolling a supposedly abandoned Terran colony. Shilvok commandos raiding a station were found stacked like statues in a single room, their bodies frozen mid-motion. The Council investigated, demanded explanations. Terran officials handed over blueprints, everyone aligned perfectly with non-lethal technology specifications. But the results were undeniable. No trace of human blood had been spilled, and yet no enemy survived. One Shulvok observer, after watching surveillance footage from a failed raid, said simply, "They didn't fight us, they erased us." Behind closed doors, the Terran Defense Coalition developed the Neurolumin Lattice, a grid of light-based sensors that emitted complex strobing sequences tailored to hijack the optical nerves of most known species. Originally designed for interspecies medical diagnostics, the lattice had a secondary mode, one that induced temporary blindness, followed by hallucinations and full sensory overload. Pirates attempting to board a human freighter equipped with one of these systems were found days later, gibbering about gods of light whispering secrets into their skulls. The ingenuity didn't stop at personal or ship-based systems. On a planetary scale, Terran engineers constructed atmospheric modulators, devices that could alter the composition of breathable air in controlled zones. In hostile environments, these tools created sudden oxygen shifts, or flooded compounds with hyperdense fog that reacted with alien skin. All labeled as environmental control systems, all perfectly legal. It was no longer about defense. It was transformation. Humanity had moved past the need for weapons. Instead, they weaponized the environment, the air, the sound, the rules themselves. Alien navies tried to adjust. They increased surveillance, retrofitted their fleets, and trained their soldiers to recognize human tech patterns. But the problem wasn't recognition. It was predictability. Terran tech evolved faster than doctrine. Every time an alien species countered a tactic, humans replaced it with two new ones. They didn't broadcast threats. They didn't retaliate publicly. They let their absence speak. The silence surrounding human space became a kind of dread. The closer you came to a Terran colony, the fewer ships you saw. The emptier space felt. Not because humans were hiding, but because everyone else was afraid to get close. Then came the breaking point. A Shulvok task force entered the Harkon Drift, a star cluster housing 3 independent Terran colonies. The operation was meant to be surgical, quick, a demonstration of force. Instead, the task force disappeared. All of it. No explosions, no transmissions, just a spike in gravitational interference and then nothing. The Council panicked. The Shulvok demanded an answer. Humanity provided none. No press conferences, no threats, no war declarations, just a short file released into the Galactic Public Channel, a silent video of a vast dark field where the fleet had once been, now scattered with glassy wreckage frozen in orbit. The file ended with a single line in Terran Basic. "Do not mistake compliance for helplessness." That phrase haunted the galaxy. Alien military strategists rewrote their protocols. Merchant guilds rerouted around human territory. Even black market weapons dealers refused to sell to pirates targeting Terran sectors. The risk was no longer measured in ships lost or troops killed, but in being erased so thoroughly, no one remembered your name. Some called it psychological warfare. Others called it a demonstration of higher dimensional tech. But among the Terrans, it was just called Plan B. Plan A had been diplomacy, peace, cooperation. But when the galaxy banned their methods, they adapted not to survive, but to make a point. The brilliance of it wasn't just the weapons. It was the restraint. Every attack had been defensive. Every tool justified. No treaties broken. No wars declared. Just a quiet, unstoppable assertion of presence. Humanity had learned from every war in its history that brute force fades, that noise burns out, but precision, innovation, and unpredictability endure. So when the galaxy tried to make them weak, they didn't resist. They evolved. As the galaxy adjusted to the silent terror of Terran adaptability, internal dynamics began to shift. The firearm disarmament accords had technically succeeded. No traditional firearms remained in human hands. But the result wasn't peace. It was fear. Species that once scoffed at humanity's reliance on primitive weaponry now spoke in hushed tones about the silent perimeter, the invisible line marking human space. Even the most hardened raiders no longer dared to cross it. Trade routes bent around Terran colonies like a river flowing around a mountain. Systems that had once seen constant skirmishes now sat in eerie quiet. No patrols, no skirmishes, just an omnipresent awareness that if you crossed the line, you might not come back. The Council was paralyzed. Officially, humanity remained compliant. There had been no violations, yet dozens of incidents had left fleets shattered and stations disabled. The TDC responded to every inquiry with full transparency, offering technical specifications and medical reports. Every device was non-lethal. Every system was defensive. And yet, no one who attacked Terrans lived to challenge that claim. Some within the Council began to suspect the truth, that humanity wasn't operating in loopholes. They were operating in a different paradigm altogether. The Shulvok, desperate to reclaim lost face, began developing countertech. They invested heavily in bioempathic inhibitors, hoping to shield their soldiers from the neurosensory pulses Terran devices used. They equipped ships with anti-gravitational dampeners to resist spatial warping. They even tried deploying autonomous drones that mimic Terran sensor patterns. None of it worked. During a field test near the Ember Vortex, a Shulvok fleet deployed one of these counter-adapted drone swarms into a derelict Terran station. Within 37 seconds, all drones deactivated. Their memory cores were wiped. The station emitted no detectable signals, no energy output, not even motion. The only clue left behind was a single floating beacon with a timestamp and coordinates that pointed directly to Shulvok High Command's central databank. A warning, perfectly legal, utterly terrifying. Council meetings turned frantic. Delegates argued over whether to revoke the ban entirely. Some wanted to approach humanity and beg for an arms agreement. Others warned that any misstep could be interpreted as aggression. But the Terrans gave them no clear path forward. They remained silent, present, and unbothered. Their colonies flourished. Their convoys traveled alone and untouched. Their influence spread not through conquest, but through inevitability. While other species scrambled to counter them, humans moved on. They weren't trying to win the arms race anymore. They had changed the battlefield entirely. Their latest developments included logic disruption fields, subtle zones that interfered with computational reasoning. Enemy AI would stutter, make irrational decisions, or loop into recursive inaction. These zones didn't fire a shot. They simply made the enemy forget how to aim. Terran scouts began testing quantum shadowing, a technique that split a ship's position across multiple probability states. Observers couldn't lock onto their location, and attacks would pass through empty space. The technology wasn't perfected yet, but even the prototypes were enough to cause confusion. What looked like one corvette was actually 5 blurred echoes, none of which could be physically touched until they collapsed into one real object, often just moments before impact. Still, the humans refrained from aggression. They didn't conquer new territory. They didn't impose political demands. They offered trade freely. They responded to requests for aid. They attended every diplomatic summit when invited. And this unsettled the galaxy more than anything else. Because fear thrives in silence. Across the galaxy, whispers began to form, not among soldiers or politicians, but scientists and philosophers. Had humanity uncovered something deeper? Were these tools merely extensions of new knowledge? Some speculated that Terrans had unlocked post-conventional physics. Others believed their minds had evolved to perceive time or matter differently. The truth was more grounded and more dangerous. Humanity wasn't ahead because of secrets. They were ahead because they were desperate enough to imagine what others never dared to try. One council researcher put it plainly in a Naudi classified memo. The danger of humanity isn't in their technology. It's in their mindset. Every limitation becomes a puzzle. Every obstacle becomes a game. They are not limited by tradition, culture, or pride. They do not ask what is allowed. They ask what is possible. The memo ended with a warning. Never force humanity into a corner. They will dig through the wall. Within Terran territory, education systems were redesigned around fluid problem solving, not rote learning. Children were trained to approach challenges like simulations, when conditions unknown, rules changeable. Military academies removed traditional war games and replaced them with ethical paradox drills. Even civilian life shifted. Terrans began to innovate in peacekeeping, medicine, even agriculture, using the same adaptive principles. They weren't just building better defenses. They were creating a civilization that expected to be challenged, and always had an answer ready. The irony wasn't lost on some council members. In trying to make humanity less dangerous, they had pushed them into their most creative phase of evolution. They had ignited the very trait that made humans unstoppable: the refusal to accept defeat as the final state. The council grew divided. Some factions pushed for peace talks, not out of diplomacy, but survival. Others still believed the humans could be contained, but no one dared test them again. And yet, humans extended no ultimatums. They didn't rise to power with threats or fleets. They simply made themselves untouchable. They became the mirror in which every other species saw their own limitations. The pirates disappeared. The borders stabilized. For the first time in centuries, systems long plagued by war fell quiet. And somewhere deep in Terran space, scientists continued to work, not on weapons but on ideas, because humanity understood something that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to learn. In a universe where peace can be broken with a single law, real strength lies not in the weapons you carry, but in how well you fight without them. As decades passed, the galaxy settled into an uneasy equilibrium, one defined not by the power of arms, but by the absence of war. And at the heart of that shift stood humanity, not dominant by conquest, not feared by their numbers, but revered for what they had become, the species that survived the impossible by inventing its own rules. The Council, once firm in its position, now treaded carefully. Their declarations were phrased more diplomatically, their laws drafted with a caution that hadn't existed before. Behind closed doors, simulations ran constantly. What happens if the Terrans respond? And they all ended the same way. Unpredictable, swift, and devastating, often without a single shot fired. It wasn't fear of war anymore. It was fear of irrelevance. Humanity didn't need galactic approval. Their technologies had redefined industry, medicine, and even diplomacy. Their non-lethal innovations were now standard issue among elite security forces across multiple species, purchased under tight, often anonymous contracts, despite official council embargoes. The irony was bitter. The very tools meant to humble humanity had become the envy of the galaxy. But humans never boasted. They didn't issue threats. They didn't speak of dominance. Their greatest weapon, in the end, had not been their creativity or adaptability. It had been their restraint, because humanity understood the true purpose of power. Not to display it, but to choose when not to use it. A single incident crystallized this truth for the rest of the galaxy. The Kithari Empire, a younger but rising power, had never directly clashed with humanity. Their leaders, eager to prove themselves, saw Terran silence as weakness. One of their border colonies, situated near a neutral zone, began experimenting with illegal mining operations dangerously close to a human-protected planet. When confronted diplomatically, the Kithari responded with mockery and sent a small military escort to enforce their claim. No weapons were fired. No Terran ships retaliated. The Kithari entered orbit without resistance, even landing survey teams on the outskirts of a Terran-controlled zone. 2 hours later, every Kithari ship vanished from sensors. No explosions, no transmissions, just gone. The next day, a single Kithari command ship was found drifting in neutral space. Its entire crew was alive, unharmed, but unresponsive, locked in a coma-like state. When medics finally revived one officer, he uttered one phrase over and over again: "We were shown the end." The Council demanded an explanation. Humanity provided none. They denied launching an attack. Their officials simply stated, "Our protocols remain defensive." The Kithari trespassed. Their fate was their own. The Kithari Empire retreated from the region, issued a full apology, and entered long-term isolation. The incident became a myth almost overnight. Stories circulated of Terrans who could weaponize perception itself, of fleets dismantled by mere exposure to information the human mind could comprehend, but others could not endure. Whether the tales were true didn't matter. The result did. Humanity no longer needed weapons. Their silence was enough. In the decades that followed, their technologies quietly reshaped the galactic frontier. Entire systems turned to Terran consultancies for logistics, planetary development, and threat management. Former warlords became clients. Once hostile species offered cultural exchanges, desperate to understand the humans, not just their science, but their thinking. And this is where the greatest shift happened, not in weaponry, but in philosophy. The Terran response to the firearm ban had forced them to look inward. In place of brute strength, they cultivated brilliance. Where once they had wielded metal and explosives, now they shaped context, environments, probabilities. They learned to think not in weapons, but in outcomes. In one now famous Terran lecture broadcast to open networks, an instructor explained it like this: "You took away the trigger, so we made the air fight for us. You outlawed combustion, so we used resonance. You banned kinetics, so we bent gravity. Every time you closed a door, we built a wall, walked around it, or broke the building entirely. We are not dangerous because of what we use. We are dangerous because we always find a way." That quote echoed across the galaxy, not as a threat, but as a law of reality. Even the most advanced empires began to reassess their doctrines. What they once dismissed as human unpredictability, they now saw as a form of strategic genius. Universities began modeling their problem-solving curricula after Terran neural heuristics. Military academies taught Terran conflict theory as a core module. The lesson wasn't in how to defeat humans, it was in how to not need to fight them at all. Because by then, everyone knew. Starting a war with humans didn't just end badly. It ended in ways no one could explain. In the shadows, however, a quiet truth stirred. Humanity had not exhausted its innovation. The brightest minds continued to push boundaries, though not for vengeance or superiority, but for prevention. They understood that one day someone would forget the lesson. Someone new would rise and believe that the silence around Earth meant weakness, not warning. And so they prepared not for war, but for peace forged through absolute capability. They worked not to dominate, but to ensure that if war came, it would never leave the first move. No blood, no glory, no ashes, just the end, calculated, clean, and irreversible. Because they had learned that the galaxy wasn't changed by louder weapons or bigger ships. It was changed by those who made war obsolete, not by fear, but by making the cost of aggression inconceivably high. The ban on firearms had tried to tame humanity. Instead, it had unshackled them. And from that moment forward, every species, no matter how large, how old, or how powerful, carried a quiet truth in the back of their minds. If you step onto Terran soil, bring no weapons, because they don't need any to end you.